And now let me welcome financial journalist Max Keiser. Welcome, Max. Okay, Max, give us a little bit more of the black and white here as far as where do you think this is going and what does it take to turn this all around for the EU zone?
Well, first of all, the unemployment in the EU is closer to what you might call the actual unemployment number if you're comparing it to the U.S. You know, the U.S. doesn't report the actual unemployment numbers. They leave out, for example, people who have stopped looking for work. If you were to add those numbers back in, then you find that the U.S., on an apples-to-apples comparison, has an unemployment rate closer to 15, 16%, and it's growing to 20%. So the unemployment picture, because it's accurately represented in the EU, looks bigger as compared to the U.S., but in fact the U.S. is much worse.
So you're saying that the U.S., the news from the U.S. is actually more dire, but a little bit more sugar-coated, correct?
Right. The U.S. sugarcoats their numbers, and the unemployment picture in the U.S. is worse, and it's going to get a lot worse, especially with the bankruptcy of General Motors and all the affiliated companies that are associated with General Motors in the auto industry. So you're going to see the unemployment numbers get very high. Now, looking back to Europe, if you look at where the biggest pockets of unemployment are, we're talking about Spain and Ireland. And what do these two countries have in common? Well, they were both involved in the speculative financial bubble that was exported to them from the U.S. and the U.K., who, of course, packaged a lot of bogus financial derivative products, collateralized debt obligations, and dumped them into the banks in Europe, and they have exploded. And this has caused a lot of pain and suffering in Europe. So the European banks are forced to write down this debt a little bit more honestly, I might add, than the U.S. banks are doing. But in Spain and Ireland, where the speculation and the housing speculation that went along with these derivative products exploded, we're seeing the highest levels of unemployment.
Max, are you expecting any type of rippling effect? You talked about as far as the continued deterioration in the U.S. economy, and especially with the downfall of the car industry. Do you think that this can have a rippling effect as far as affecting Europe and their economy?
I'm sorry, you called it a what kind of effect?
A rippling sort of effect because of the car industry, what's going on in the United States, and we do have also workers in Europe that work for the American car industry. Can this add to the unemployment numbers and basically cause a rippling effect in the economic downfall in Europe too?
Well, yeah, of course. The biggest financial component in the global economy is still the financial sector. And to the extent that the American financial sector is going to continue to implode, it's going to have ripple effects around the world. You see that in the U.S. with the fall now in the U.S. dollar beginning to gather pace again. But these other currencies like the euro is showing relative strength, and this is going to give them, it shows that these economies in Europe really have a lot stronger underlying fundamental strength. Germany is a huge exporter in Europe. There's no comparison in the U.S. at all to Germany, and Germany is carrying the entire Eurozone. And there's tremendous pockets of strength in the Eurozone, and you don't have any strength in the American market except for the military, which of course, unless they're going to start invading yet another country or the copyright cartel, which is dominated by Hollywood, there's not really much that goes on in the U.S. in terms of manufacturing or GDP growth that's germane to anything that you see in Europe.
So you're expecting the European region to recover before the United States, Max?
Well, on a global basis, Asia looks like it's going to be recovering first. Then you're going to see some continued relative strength in Europe. But the U.S. is really the weakest link in the global economy. You're going to see a decoupling, as it's been described by some economists in the U.S., where these other countries like China and Brazil are doing business with Europe, and they're creating bilateral deals, and they're getting out of the U.S. dollar as reserve currency. There's big news today about how Russia and other countries want to create a parallel reserve currency to get out of the dollar as a reserve currency. The U.S. dollar is really the weakest global currency, and as that becomes more of a factor going forward, these other countries will divorce themselves from this horrible reserve currency of the U.S. dollar relationship, and they'll be much better off for it.
Okay, Max Keiser, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And viewers, thank you for joining us.